Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 11th ValEUs Open Lecture. ValEUs is a Jean Monnet policy network founded by the European Commission. It involves 20 institutions, partners, and from 17 countries across 5 continents. And it focuses on the contestation of the European Union values in the international relations. And I'm especially excited this morning because we are hosting the lecture by Timm Beichelt, who is the leader of our whole project. He is leading our project, is the principal investigation. Timm Beichelt is professor of European Studies at the European University Viadrina in Frankfurt am Oder. And he's currently the Dean of the Faculty of Social and Cultural Science. Right. His teaching and research focuses on democracy in Central and Eastern Europe, European Union politics, emotions in politics, and Timm Beichelt's lecture today is entitled Germany and Europe, what to expect after the elections. And so this is an issue that is the focus of everyone's attention in these turbulent times. So we are very curious to listen to this lecture. But before giving the floor to Timm, I'll give the floor to the Honorary Consul of Germany in Florence, in Tuscany, because it's, of course, the reference for the whole region. And so thank you so much for coming here, Federico Di Salvo. And so after Federico, I'll give the floor to our director, Professor Chiaramonte, the director of the Department of Political and Social Sciences of the University of Florence, for greetings. And then after the lecture, we'll have time, yes, enough time, for questions and answers from the audience. So thank you again for joining us, and please, Honorary Consul, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the floor. Thank you. Welcome, good morning, welcome everybody. I would like to thank you, Professor Laura Leonardi and Professor Chiaramonte, for the invitation here, and I welcome the Jean Monnet Policy Network entitled ValEUs, Research and Education Network on Contestation and EU Foreign Policy. So from my point of view, I'm happy to be able to welcome you to Florence, especially distinguished Professor Timm Beichelt. So Florence, Tuscany, is a center for many European scholars and citizens, and for many Germans. There are at least 15,000 German citizens in Tuscany. So the German consulate in Tuscany, which I manage, has numerous responsibilities and competences, almost like a general consulate: civil status, notary affairs, judicial cooperation, police cooperation, civil protection, jurisdictional defense, cultural, commercial representation, and of course, developing new synergies and bilateral projects. The point of view of the German consulate in Tuscany is valuable, as there are 60 consulates in Florence. Florence and Tuscany, with their resources, are the focus of attention of the entire international community. And let me give you an extra consideration. The Federal Republic of Germany has specifically shown an open-minded approach in appointing me as a diplomat, as a representative of Germany, in choosing me from the civil society, because I am an honorary consul, not a career consul, a Beamter. So the title of this lecture is very interesting. Mine is just a greeting. I'm a lawyer, not a sociologist, but I would like to give you some elements, some words. I won't be able to talk about many things. I won't be able to make any predictions or comments on German election because I am a German representative and I don't have the power, the mandate to do so. And because the election are so recent and because my administration, the Federal Foreign Office, Auswärtiges Amt, is waiting for the formation of the new government, for new directives on both economics and social policy and international policy. But in line with your meeting, I will limit myself to making some sociological observation in a personal capacity, which are there for all to see. So what emerges from the last election is a maximum voter turnout of 83.5%, the highest since reunification. Disappointment with the economic crisis, with disappointment with the performance of the traditional parties. Young people have polarized towards the extremes. East and West have polarized. The leading party in the capital, Berlin, is Die Linke. Germans feel a growing and tangible need for reassurance. There are many challenges we saw in the last days. Yesterday, I was at the School of Transnational Governance at the European University Institute in Fiesole with the German ambassador to Italy and other professors and politicians. I met with young German researchers, and they took part in a panel discussion entitled Transatlantic Relations in the Age of Trump II. Can Europe develop an effective strategy? So new challenges are emerging and new strategies are needed. But overall, we have to imagine a new world. The challenges that have emerged from yesterday's meeting, from the Munich Security Conference, and from international relations in recent days, and from the London summit and the decision made in Brussels in these days are important. Faced with these challenges, Germany remains an economic, political, and strategic player. They would like to play a role and that believes it has the right antibodies to fight instability, hopefully. Democratic participation in Germany and political information are, formally speaking, in excellent health, considering the voter turnout is the highest it has been since 1990. What should we do with this democratic participation? What should we do if we are able to take a realistic approach? Certainly build new ideas. From this point of view, listening to civil society, which indicates alternatives to traditional political agendas, is something to be valued. We are faced with choices that need to be made. We are on what someone before us called the apocalyptic reach of history. On one side, there is the destruction of the earth and the entire family of peoples that inhabit it. On the other side, there is the flowering of new world of social peace, equality, sustainability, and harmony among peoples. In my experience, I can certainly say that the Germans and the foreigners in this beautiful region, my circumscription, made of history and civilization, or homeland of the Renaissance and humanism, know how to see the glass as half full, have a lot of hope in the future and wish to carry on in an harmonic environment, studies, investments, and constructive and propulsive discussions. They often manage to have more faith in the future than the Tuscans themselves. You are one of the many examples of excellence that I see. I leave you to your meeting, curious and listening to your reflection and your results and the lecture of Professor Beichelt, and I wish the consortium all the best with its work and your valuable project.
Thank you all for being here. I would like to welcome you on behalf of my department, the Department of Political and Social Sciences. I would like to thank my colleague Laura Leonardi for organizing this lecture, this meeting. I would like to welcome Federico Di Salvo, the Consul, Honorary Consul of Germany, and I would like to welcome and thank particularly, of course, Professor Beichelt. A few days ago, I read an article by Timm Gaston Arsch in The Guardian, and it was a kind of call for Germany to play a major role of leadership in this moment in Europe. He says something like, Germany had made very relevant strategic choices under Adenauer when placed itself within the Western world and started, together with other countries, the process of European integration. Made another choice that was became very beneficial to Europe at the time of Willy Brandt, when he, through the Ostpolitik, paved the way for an appeasement with the Soviet Union, and so the end of the Cold War. And again, a strategic choice was very important at the time of Helmut Kohl, when the unification of Germany took place in agreement, agreed upon with the United States, with France especially, given its role in Europe. So, according to this intellectual, now it's time for Germany to make another relevant strategic choice that we'll see whether it's going to be beneficial for Europe, but it's a call for a leadership in this Europe. I'm sure that in this lecture that I'm looking forward to listen to you, Timm Beichelt will answer also this question. Thank you again for coming.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. Thank you for the greeting words and for the kindness to host me here. I'm very happy to be here in the context of the ValEUs network. There are some flyers here. Maybe we can pass them around. Laura Leonardi already said a few words about the project, which deals with European values in a specific sense, namely that there are many values which are announced and marked down in European treaties, for example, but also in the general rhetoric of European Union institutions, on the one hand, but on the other hand, we see in political reality that a lot of these values cannot be followed. Are not followed, cannot be followed. So I'm not sure. Sometimes by political will, sometimes by other conditions. And the problem with a normative power like the European Union is that its legitimation rests on belief, on values. And what happens to a polity like the European Union if constantly core values are somehow hurt? Yeah, for example, human rights values with regard to migration. You can have a political position as you wish, but the idea of our project is how can the EU hold up its legitimation when it constantly violates certain values? So we're not a repair factory for bringing up new solutions only. We have this policy briefs and so on, which you have in these kind of projects, but it's more like a general reflection, because I mean, which national polity like Italy or the Federal Republic would follow all the values it promises? The difference is that the EU itself lacks power in many dimensions we know from politics, and is based on norms. Okay, and in this context, we visit each other, and well, when I said that I would come here, it was even not clear that the German elections were going to take place, because we agreed on that maybe last September or last August or something. And I wanted to speak something about, European values, but then when we found out that this is just 1.5 weeks after the elections, I thought, since I've also published on that some years ago, however, that I simply would take the occasion to talk about these elections. And I can already tell you that I don't have like the main argument or the main thesis what can be expected, because it's only a few days ago that the elections took place, and right now is the European Council, and what has been announced in Berlin yesterday, the day before, was very surprising, but what will be surprises tonight? So we are in a period when things are very, very much changing, and this is why I want to keep my presentation relatively short to hear what kind of questions you have. And I will be very happy to discuss things with you. So I will talk about election results and coalition options. For those of you who haven't followed the news very closely, let's say, then I will talk a bit about the European dimension and give further implications. And this title, Further Implications, already tells you that there's several arenas I want to touch without, being able to develop one integrated argument at the moment. So in November 2024, relatively surprising in a country whose political elites are so proud of being stable, from one day to the other, this coalition fell apart. It was surprising still, because already at the time, it could be seen that actually none of the parties involved would really gain from a new election. Usually if you call a new election, you do that because you expect things to be better for your own party afterwards. Think of French politics, for example, or of British politics. Here, this was already a kind of surprise, because the polls were relatively bad. And I will say a bit about this later on. So Christian Lindner, the person to the left here, who was the leader of the Liberal Party, didn't make it back to Parliament even. Olaf Scholz, the former Chancellor and current Chancellor until the end of March, already said that he would step down and not play an active role in the new government. And Habeck, the Minister of Economics, also announced that he will not take a leading role. So on the level of, let's say, elites, political elites, party elites, it is a clear cut. In about a month, we will have a completely new team. Yeah, maybe some faces from the current government, SPD ministers maybe, but in general, there is a break. Okay, so this is a short slide, but it needs to be mentioned, the electoral law, which was new. The current Bundestag has much more than 700 seats, and for decades, or for many years at least, there has been a discussion to reduce the size of the Bundestag. Of course, Germany having about 80 million inhabitants, you can discuss to which extent you need a big parliament to be representative of the people. For example, China, it's of course not a democratic parliament, but has 2,500 members. So if you have a big country, you also need to some extent a big parliament, especially federal republic. But the decision was to take it down to 630 seats, which means that the electoral system was changed a bit, and the second vote, which is responsible for the proportion of parties in the Bundestag, has become more important and is now the only, the decisive way the parliament is distributed. So no more Überhangmandate. I even don't know how to translate that into English. But on the other hand, you have some reforms on these so-called first votes with the direct mandates, which led to, let me just jump right away, which led to the situation that you have some 10, 15 persons who were directly elected on the first vote, but did not make it to the Bundestag despite being directly elected, because it's the mandate level which is relevant for the distribution of parties or distribution of factions. I'm saying this because there is this kind of, let's say, from the side of those, especially parliamentarians, politicians who have been elected but then are not represented in parliament. It means that in a lot of länder, those parliamentarians got to parliament which were on the party list, which means that now the level of regional representation is somehow diminished. It's interesting to follow that debate about the legitimation of this representative system, because at the same time, as we will see in a minute, two parties above 4% of the vote, but because of the 5% threshold, which is there in the electoral system until today, are not represented. So for the German public, it seems to be more important that these single mandate persons are not represented despite having won their electoral mandates than more than 10 or even 15% not represented. This can be seen here. Now, second votes, you have to look at the downside of this, and you have to look that the CDU, the Christian Democrats, I don't know, I will sit down again. I think for the stream I have to be close to the microphone, but I will shortly show it. Yeah? So the CDU is together in a faction with the CSU, which is a Christian Democrat, Christian Socialist, they call themselves a party in Bavaria, so it's a regional party. Together you have to add these to up to 28.6%, so less than a third of the vote. It's not huge numbers in German conditions. So 28.6, the SPD with 16.4, losses of about 9%. Greens with 11.6, FDP out of the Bundestag. Other parties, although Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht is not even on that list, with 4.97, so there was only 14,000 votes which missed, so they are also not represented. So I have 9.4 plus 4.3, which is 14% not represented. Then the left with 8.8, and the AfD, of course, I will come to that, with 20.8 on the distribution of seats. I will not go into that, but now I have to see. I have this map, and if you want later on, we can look into that. Hold on, English. I thought I had it, but of course not on this computer. So I want to. I will, once I go back to my presentation, you can see and copy the address maybe, but it's an English language source for interesting data. So you have the high voter turnout, and here you can go into first vote, second vote shares on a regional level, and if there is interest, or if there is a need, I would go onto that level later on in the discussion. I'm just showing that. So distribution of seats. Yeah, we have a relative majority for CDU together with CSU, 208 seats altogether. The SPD with 120 seats. And you can see here that these three parties will build a bloc. Yeah, 1, 2, 3. They have a majority to form a coalition. What is important here, if you look at the right column, you see that the SPD lost about a third of its mandates. So even if the party is going to return back into government and have a few ministries and a few executive positions, it is very clear that this faction now is in very big discontent. A lot of people lost their mandates, and we will come to this very interesting decision that now, with regard to military spending and the debt brake, the old parliament might still take a vote, which means you have almost a third of that persons in the SPD faction who will take that vote, but are not going to be in the new Bundestag. So already I'm not talking on a legitimate level, but on the sociological level, can the SPD leadership be sure that these parliamentarians vote as the party wants? Because they have lost their mandates. You can see that the Greens lost 33 and are not in government anymore. So, can you rely on them to vote with a new government of which they are not a part? So I'm already saying this here right now. If we go into the numbers. And if we go into more details, it's not really sure, to my opinion at least, that these decisions which will be announced and which I will present in a minute are going to hold. If you look to AFD, you see that the new faction has 152 persons, a plus of 69. And here is the source, at least as I can read in the newspapers. And I am not able, in my current positions, to have an own research on this, but what you read in the newspapers, that these are right-wing extremists and radicals, even within the, let's say, big picture of the AFD, which is quite radical and extremist in comparison to other populist parties in Europe. You know that not even the Hungarians would like to go with the AFD into one faction. AFD forms an own faction within the European Parliament because it has been, relatively extremist even in that terms. And now the new members of that faction are said to be even more extreme than, let's say, the average of the AFD so far. I'm saying this because in the German constitution, we have a relative, and in the German political system, we have a relatively strong possibility to declare parties as unconstitutional and forbid them. Yeah, and the AFD is already now partly extremist, declared by internal security services. This has, of course, a lot to do with a Nazi past and being right-wing extremist, which is anti-democrat, not a non-democrat, according to German definitions. So the AFD is, in parts of Germany, declared completely extremist, especially in the East, in a few länder. But now you have all these new, parliamentarians, which are said to be even more extremist coming in. So, a lot of new things, a lot of interesting and new things for specialists of German politics. After 10 days, I'm not really able to give you the. No, after 2.5 weeks, sorry. I'm not able to give you the completely new picture, but it's there have been quite a few changes. The last party I would like to say a few words about Die Linke, the left, the successor party of the East German Communist Party, Sozialistische Einheitspartei Deutschland, but being transformed several times. So now it's more like a pacifist, socialist, leftist party. Quite normal in European comparative perspective. They were set to not make it into parliament about 2 months before the elections. And then we had this incident when Friedrich Merz, the new chancellor, voted with the AfD in the parliament on stricter migration laws, which didn't, it didn't even succeed. But this gave a strong effect of counter Merz, counter CDU, and strengthened and boosted, so to say, the pacifist party according to the situation in January. So the leftists had a strong anti-Nazi, anti-extremist, and also pro-pacifist position, because the Greens, as part of the government, could not go on the same lines in programmatic terms. The left profited and now got into parliament relatively comfortable, if I remind you here, with 8.8%. So they had a boost they doubled their voters within a few weeks. Okay, so these are the options shown here. You have this new majority, CDU, CSU 208 plus SPD 120. That's a 12-person majority. I read in the newspaper, again, it's no research, I just read it, there was a test vote within the SPD faction. Will you support Friedrich Merz as a new chancellor? And because of these events in January, when Merz went together with the AfD, many social democrats, especially from the leftist camps, don't trust him too much. And so 6 of them said, under no circumstances, I vote for Merz. And 6 of them said, most probably not. So I read this, and only later on, when preparing for this speech, I thought, well, this is 12, and 328 minus 12 is 316. So one thing which might become important in the next week is this tiny group, Südschleswiger Wählerverband. Yeah, it's a party of the Danish minority. They have 1 person. Yeah, so and I mean, if it solidifies that the SPD does not completely support Merz, they have this 1 extra vote, which is probably going to be in favor of this. Well, but maybe this is, maybe it's also going to be very different. We don't know yet. So the new parliament, a specific constellation. In Germany, you have the old parliament, Bundestag, still acting until the end of March. So the new parliament is not constituted yet, which means the parliament now, until the end of March, is not even in that composition, but in the old composition. I didn't bring a picture. They are going to take maybe a lot of important decisions, which is constitutionally, it seems okay, but from the point of view of legitimation, not very okay. I mean, you would say you don't take substantial decisions, this new incoming parliament, but these decisions we are going to talk about in a minute are very substantial. They're not only substantial, they're very substantial because they will even change the constitution. So it's not really clear what is going to happen there. Here we have, just to show this, a more solid, not only 12 seats majority, but more, 44, would be something we know from various other European countries, which is a right-wing, including populist government. Yeah, we have this, I don't have to say this here in Italy, but we've had it in Denmark, we've had it in Sweden, a lot of countries. And so the question comes up, why is it so excluded in the German context that these two conservative parties work together? And here the history, I mean, Nazi history is one element, but not the only one. Nazi history being the understanding of the moderate conservative parties that you stay away from extremism, that you stay away from hatred of foreigners, and AfD is more xenophobic than many other, even more xenophobic than many other populist parties in Europe. But you also have this extremism element. Yeah, if the security services have declared the AfD partly extremists, and then has even become more extremist in the last elections, it is not very wise for the moderate conservatives to go with them, because you don't know what this party is going to develop into. So here it seems, at least at the moment, that the constellation of populism plus Christian democracy, which holds in some other European countries, is not going to come through in Germany, not even in 1 year or maybe in 2. Yeah, but what people are thinking about, or what is being discussed, if there is no, if things continue as they are, this might be different in 4 years. And those who are particularly extremist remind the German public that there is also an election in the year 2033, and it would be a 100-year celebration of the Nazis coming to power. So this is also one of the reasons why now Friedrich Merz, at least this is my interpretation, is taking strong steps to somehow reverse the trend, which has been quite obvious in the German context. This much on the on events. Let's turn to the European dimension a bit. And I wanted to do this by showing the electoral programs of the CDU-CSU. Insisting that the effect of these elections on Europe have two dimensions. Yeah? One might be on, let's say, the further position of a German government with regard to European integration, in particular, deepening in the field of defense and military spending, yeah, which would be some kind of, in a neo-functional way, if you want, a deepening of the European polity. And on the other hand, you have a lot of decisions, let's say on a day-to-day level, of the German government trying to upload its preferences to the EU level. And if you speak about economy and taxes, social security, debt break or debt target, you see that there are a lot of implications on the European level. I have decided, however, not to go into details here, but rather react to questions. But what I can show already at the moment is that 2 weeks after the elections, in two core promises, so to say, of the CDU-CSU, there have been considerable changes. Yeah, if you look back, there is no question in the electoral program, and there is no question when looking at the rhetoric of Merz, and there are even more liberal persons in the CDU, that the debt target, the debt break of 60% should be kept. It has now been announced that this will not be the case anymore. Even more so, we can only follow newspapers at the moment. The new government, CDU, CSU, SPD, are considering a 500 billion package to infrastructure, And this is symbolically not irrelevant because the SPD leadership suggested 6 years ago, I think, 5 or 6 years ago, 2019, to have an investment package of 500 billion. So exactly that, exactly the amount now. And there have been, apparently the new government, the CDU has been advised by leading German economists, and they suggested that there is a gap of 450 billion in infrastructure spending. You know, I came here by train, and if you use German trains, you know what we mean with these infrastructure problems. Okay, but there was this party which promised to keep the debt brake to its leaders. You might expect, okay, 450 or maybe 400, but what they did instead was to jump up to 500. And in these circles, you know, it's no suggestion of the 500 billion 6 years ago, because it's actually a bit the same people dealing with each other. So there is a clear symbolic signal of the CDU to go towards the SPD, probably in exchange for some other elements of the SPD program. So defense is the second thing which is marked here. Strengthening the Bundeswehr was a commitment of Merz, but even here there is a constitutional element also with regard to the debt brake. How far can you boost military spending? And this is obviously also now in the making. That this will be melted down. So the boost in military spending was not really a part of the Merz program, because I think the German public in general, does not consist of the biggest fans of military spending if you compare it to the rest of Europe for obvious reasons and interesting terms. So any party promising, let's say, we will spend 3% or 5%, as is the case in Poland, on military would have lost at the polls. So what you see here is quite a considerable break of promises of the CDU-CSU. You know, I'm not accusing them here. I'm a scholar. I'm not talking as a political person here. What I want to say is there might be legitimation problems, not only between Merz and his voters, who elected him for something else, but also within his own faction. The CDU, in particular, consists partly of economists who don't like the loosening of the debt brake at all, and justify this, by the way, with Europe. So the thing is, there is this, something which has developed within the last 25, 30 years, that somehow German elites on the EU level have this assumption, to my, as far as I'm concerned, wrongly, but they have the assumption that they have to show the rest of Europe how things work. Yeah, and one of the elements where this shows strongest is the debt brake. And therefore, I heard an interview with the CDU politician about a week ago. He said, we cannot loosen the debt brake. I mean, it was still already in the making, but he was like a backbencher, not knowing things. He said, we have to keep this, because otherwise he said on public radio, otherwise there's Italy, Greece, and Spain. You know, so the idea in the CDU to keep the debt brake has a European dimension. Again, I'm not saying rightly or wrongly, but sociologically, this is a programmatic element within the CDU. And of course, there will be a problem with the opposition parties in the new parliament, in particular Linke and AfD. I mean, they can rightly say, you know, what kind of election winner, you know. Already, a bit less than expected in gains, but then in addition, 2 core promises are being changed after such a short time. So this decision will have its toll. Going to the SPD, this is shorter. Again, I'm concentrating here these elements. Yeah, so the investments in future technologies and infrastructure is a direct citation from the SPD program. Their demand is being met, and I think, again, sociologically speaking, they can't believe how lucky they are. You know, there was actually no real constellation in which they would, you know, be able to push this through, other than maybe a strong leftist majority. And now the CDU has given in, so to say. So this is boosting the current leadership of the SPD in the negotiations. On internal and external security, one has to say that it's not so clear with the SPD if they, let's say, they are certainly not 100% fond of a boost of military spending. You have a relatively strong, not pacifist wing, but a wing which thinks that in order to keep peace in Europe, you need to look at interests of all big countries, in particular Russia. So no peace against Russia. This is Steinmeier, for example, very strongly. I mean, a lot of SPD politicians of the Schröder and Merkel era still have this idea. And of course, the strengthening of military, I mean, whom is it directed against? It's against Russia, against who else? And this will mean that there's going to be opposition to this within the SPD faction. And this is why it's going to be quite interesting to see in maybe 3 or 4 weeks, or maybe 6 weeks when the new government is formed, if actually those two strong camps within the CDU and within the SPD who are not at ease with these new developments, if they will follow or not. I would not, I would not bet a lot of money that it will actually be a very quick and smooth government formation. Okay, going back here on this division of integration policy and everyday EU politics, I listed a few elements here on European policy and wondered if the new CDU, CSU, SPD coalition, if it comes up, will change position of the German government in Brussels, in particular in the Council, but also maybe in the European Council when it goes to long-term strategy. So debt brake is almost certainly now going to fall. Security and military spending is almost certainly going to be raised. If we stay here for a minute, remember maybe 3 weeks ago there was this questionnaire by the Trump administration. What are European governments and the EU ready to invest in defending Ukraine? You know about this issue, of course, that Trump has said he will not give military guarantees to Ukraine anymore. So there was this questionnaire, 7 questions, I think, and I don't know if you looked at those. It was leaked, and the 7th question of the US administration in this questionnaire sent out to European governments and the EU is to which extent the EU would be ready to strengthen defense cooperation and military cooperation in the framework of the EU Treaty of the European Union, Article 42 to 44, I think, where it goes on common foreign and security policy. So very interesting, because the view we have on the Trump administration is that it's, gut feelings and hatred and impulsiveness. One step lower, you still have diplomats, of course, and you still have experts. And they have been, asking the right question, I think, because if there is a German army being rebuilt in a way, or built up, if there is European military spending, if there is investment in common and joint defense, due to the history not only of Germany but of all of Europe, this has to be in some kind of European context. And this would be Articles 42 to 44 of the Treaty of the European Union. Again, what else? If you look at the last weeks, there was this quite interesting reintegration of Great Britain into European foreign and security policy. I mean, Britain left the EU, and now they're there at all the summits. So there might be a different way of integrating, than Article 42 of the TEU. But still, this common and foreign security spending, there is a lack at the moment in the German public of analyzing this on the EU level. And I can strongly encourage ourselves in a way to do that, because this might be the next integration step, so linked to a furthering of European integration in that sector. Okay, EU Green Deal. CDU is not a big fan of it. It's probably, they're not going to cancel it, but they're not going to be a driver like the Green or the Traffic Light Coalition used to be. Merz, with some social democrats, has reiterated that the border controls will be sustained. It's a delicate issue in the German context, and interesting to where this plays a role and where not. I mean, we have these kind of controls between Italy and France. We've had them for 10 years, I think. We have them, by the way, between Germany and Denmark. Denmark introduced, I think in 2015 or something, border controls, and has never really stopped them. But still, you have along the borders with the Netherlands, along the borders with France, along the borders with Poland, along the borders with Austria. You have this very strong feeling that getting rid of border controls was one of the biggest achievements of European integration, which is why the public is not particularly fond of it. The more so if you live close to these borders. But still, these border controls have been announced, and they will probably stay for some time. And support for Ukraine, I was thinking where to put this arrow, but I mean, if there is the strong military spending now by Germany, you would think that it's probably going to boost, even if the Greens, which were the strongest supporter of the pro-Ukrainian position in the former government, are not part of the government anymore. Okay, further implications. So, since 2022, the crisis of the Russian-Ukrainian war, you have a relatively stable picture. If you would take this graph, further on here, you would see surprisingly little developments. Around 30% for the CDU, 20% for the AfD, 15% for the SPD, and so on. So the long term, especially since the last elections, is strengthening of the fringes, and the SPD, the Grüne, and the FDP together lost 20% of the votes. What is interesting here, 40 years ago, it would be common wisdom in Germany, if there is a high voter turnout, it's good for the center, because the center was assumed not to go to vote. But now it has been said by you, 83.5% of electoral participation, very much. But it strengthens the fringes. Yeah, so this is new. And also quite interesting, Wolfgang Merkel, for example, a prominent political scientist in Germany, has for years said the problem with the low voter turnout is that a lot of people on the fringes are not represented in parliament. Discussion in German academia, Karlsmude would also be somebody, going on that, saying, well, if you have a populist vote which is connected to a higher voter turnout, we have an ambivalent pictures if you look at legitimation, because for many years, if you had like something like 65, 70, or even less voter turnout, who is not represented, who doesn't go to vote? It now seems that the extremists go to vote, which is good for legitimation, but probably bad for certain policy options, at least as long as we discuss that in places like here. So strengthening of the fringes. Another debate. Now I'm getting to this part where it's not coherent. I jump from one topic to the next. Accommodation strategy. Does it help to follow populists or extremists in the rhetoric? Yeah, you know this is one of the biggest discussions in political comparative help. There is a relatively clear picture here. It doesn't help. The CDU in the end of supports evidence into that direction. So the policies get more populist, the policies, but the center parties who changed their position don't get the votes which they had hoped for. Then a few remarks on Merz. I don't know how well known he is abroad. He used to be a top-level politician until 2002. Then Angela Merkel ousted him. Yeah, and so he was not a faction leader anymore. Went to private business and came back to the political scene about 5 years ago. So Merz has never held executive office. He has not been a minister, not on the Länder level, not on the federal level. So there is this element. Does he know how to govern? In particular, he was mainly an oppositionist party person. Yeah. So, and only in the Bundestag, which means on the federal level, there is quite some doubt in the German public that he has the capacity to steer and to cooperate and to integrate a federalist government if he has to govern. Something which adds to this is that Klingbeil, the leader of the Social Democrat Party, who is now leading the negotiations, also has no executive experience at all, not on the Länder level, not on the party level. So you can see, a group of relatively unexperienced politicians coming up in an era where, you need some expertise. Again, I don't really know what conclusions to make of this. If they were very experienced, maybe they would not have, so to say, the will or the willingness to make such strong deviations from previous courses because of previous commitments. So maybe it is also an element which helps here in repairing, for example, the infrastructure in Germany. If we take that argument, this would be interesting for me in the discussion a bit further. We may ask now, coming from this election, where are occasions for German politicians or for European politicians to change course? Not to go along with the council and the commission and with party politics and the federal system. Yeah, it seems like it is no coincidence that there is this interregnum now. It's within this interregnum that big policy changes can be made because, so to say, this is a moment when the polity and the political system is somewhat open. Yeah, and this throws a certain light on the incapacity of the German system to come along with changes, especially in connection to the debt brake in between elections. So the idea that a federal system is contextualized by a European polity, leads to a certain status quo element of politics. This has been discussed a lot in the 1990s, but not so much in recent years. But maybe we can see here now from the from the next week that there is a certain break now to this element which allows for more dynamic policies. Merz is impulsive and unpredictable. You know, there's worse politicians in Europe, but still he has a big readiness to change his positions and not feeling the need to explain why it has changed. Yeah, and if you followed the German newspapers in the last days, you know, if you have a firm promise, you will never change the debt brake. Personally, I think it was wrong. I personally think it's good to change that. But still, I mean, if you promise that you will never do it, you would at least explain why you changed your mind. You know, this is not Merz. You know, it has always been right to change it, and this is how he reacts and how he stands to this. And therefore, it is, you know, should we call it populist? I don't know, but the reliability and the dullness of German politics on the European level will probably, to some extent, change. With Merkel and with Scholz, you always knew what they were going to say. This is not so much the case with Merz. Okay, and then to finish with on the AfD, I showed you, or I can show you, that the results of the AfD in the East were very impressive, especially on the first votes. Almost 100% of the electoral mandates in the East went to the AfD. And now you can ask why and how, you know. And therefore I have shown a few slides where in Italy you have the Mezzogiorno, so to say, constellation, and there is quite some debate. Is East Germany going to be something like the Italian South? Here you have income figures, and you have the Gini coefficient, which is much lower in East Germany. Yeah, so this adds. You may have wondered why Alice Weidel, the leader of the AfD, insists so much that Hitler was a communist. You know, it's very strange, in fact, and ideologically not very sober. But in the AfD is a party of the East, and in the East you have social security levels, inequality levels, which are lower than in the West. Yeah. So this is something interesting, which adds to this complicated picture. My last slide is here. Russian immigration. Russlanddeutsch, yeah, so German Russians, they are German citizens, but having immigrated from the Soviet Union, one has to say, and in the early years of the post-Soviet time, mainly in the East, yeah. Okay, and again, gender pay gap is much bigger in the West than in the East, which adds to this idea that the right-wing extremism of the AfD is somehow linked to a wish to keep societal equality, if you wish, between the sexes, and of course they are strongly anti-gender, but you know, on the payment level they don't follow. You would be wrong to say that the AfD follows a traditional family picture like you have in some other, like you have, for example, in France with the Rassemblement National, so or in Hungary, or in Russia, you know, this traditional family issue. This is not so much the AfD, and it has to do with their regional constellation, that the AfD is, by and large, an East German party, but it has also gained between 15% and 20% of the second votes in west of Germany. So it's only stronger in the east, in the east of Germany, but it's not a completely East German party. So wrapping it up, thank you for your attention. I tried to offer, let's say, several angles, several ways of analyzing this. I know I don't have a clear argument at the moment. It is partly, at least, due to the constellation now that things have been changing very fast, and that it's quite unpredictable from the sociological analysis of the factions into which directions the Bundestag and the new government will go. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for your interesting and stimulating lecture. So we can open the floor for some questions or comments from the audience, of course, from students. We have many students from, they are not Italian mainly, they are from other countries, in European or non-European countries too. So, and don't be shy. And of course, there are many political scientists here, colleagues from the University of Florence, from our department, from other universities, the European University Institute, the Scuola Normale. So thank you for joining us. So the floor is open. We have already a question from.
Professor, thank you so much for an interesting lecture. I have a question regarding the rise of AfD, since the influence of Germany's domestic policy and its ability to lead Europe, organize Europe in keys such as energy transition and common security. So how the rise of AfD could affect these two topics? Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, the AfD, as I said, has some extremist elements. What does it mean? Extremism, they are very critical of the German constitution. They speak of regime parties, which is a notion from the socialist Germany. They are very xenophobic. They take positions, and this is the context. So I'm not really sure, but it seems to me that in some other European countries, the radical right, or even more so populists, have started to have a coherent program around families, around the nation, and so on. Yeah. This is not the case so much in the AfD. There was, on the European Parliament elections, there were several scandals that parliamentarians, members, leading figures of the AfD were very closely cooperating with China and with Russia. Yeah. Which means, you know, if you're a nationalist party, why would you sell out your own country to clearly hostile nations? So there it's not really clear. And also these, as I said, family values. So what's defining about the AfD at the moment is they look what mainstream parties, especially CDU, CSU, SPD, and so on, do, and take the contrary position. Yeah. So this is how I define their programs, and it can clearly be seen with COVID measures. When the pandemic started, for the first 3-4 months, when the Merkel government was somehow hesitant, you know, you shouldn't lock people in, and so they had a position, you know, go for strict anti-COVID measures, you know, just lock them up. And then when the Merkel government took these positions, within 2 weeks or so, it was exactly the opposite, you know. And if you have understood this mechanism, you can see that across various fields. So this means the rise of the AfD is somewhat unpredictable in terms of policies. They are going to take a strong opposition role, and whatever the government does, they are going to be against it. Yeah. So, for example, military spending, I'm not so sure about. What about Rassemblement National in France? I think they're pro-military spending. I'm not sure. But in the German context, they're against that, the AfD. But the main reason, in my view, being that the other parties are at the moment trying to boost that. And plus, then you have these Russian connections. Like I tried to show, there is a stronger support for AfD in the east of Germany. There are instructions to Russia, in particular added by Russian immigration. So this is also one element why you would be against military spending. Yeah, I don't know. Did I answer your question? I'm not a real expert on the AfD itself, but it also has a lot to do, of course, with lack of growth, lack of infrastructure. I mean, the roads are good in the east of Germany, but if you try to go to some village with public transport, forget it. And there is not even taxi services because the population usually don't do that. So there's a lot of infrastructure elements which add to discontent in East Germany, which makes them vote for oppositionist parties.
Another question? Could you please come here? Because we need the mic. If not, there is a streaming. Yeah, thank you.
So, thank you for the lecture, and I'm sorry if I would like to insist on the AfD. But I'm interested on electoral point of view, and considering the German context, which is personally, I find it very interesting. I would like to discuss it with your knowledge, as I personally have very little knowledge of it. So you already pointed out some data about the rise of FAD, but I recently also read, for example, about a feeling of nostalgia in Eastern Germany for the German democratic. So do you think it is true, and if this contributes to the rise of the FAD?
So I'm back now to these. I go to second vote shares, yeah? Second vote shares, and look for AfD. No, sorry, I want, sorry. First vote shares. And there I go to AfD. Can you see it? Not very clear. Majority of first votes. Here you go. Yeah, so there was a joke in a German satirical magazine. A teacher of German history had lost the map of Germany between 1949 and 1989. So he had lost it. But how practical? You can just take the map of the electoral outcome and you see where East Germany was. Yeah, so this is the majority of first votes. So in almost all districts, the AfD won the electoral mandate. If you want to see here, this is BSW, Bündnissache Wagenknecht. So no, there is no majority for parties of the old West German party system. So this is the major element here, which is a. But is it nostalgia? That was your question. Is it nostalgia? I'm not really sure. There is, for example, no discourse on separatism. You know, you could, like in Catalonia, for example, you know, the discourse, you know, it might happen, but no, the AfD is proud to be, sees itself proud to be the only party who speaks of a whole German element. So there is no nostalgia for a separate East Germany. I don't see that. Also, there is no particular sympathy for the SED regime. Yeah, it's more like we are today, that's the rhetoric, today we are back in a situation as dictatorial as it was during the CD time, where you're not able to say, to speak out loudly, you know, if you have some positions in gender policy or in ecology, you know, you're not allowed to speak up. This is their rhetoric. So here again, no clear reference to East Germany. It's more this sociology of protest voters, which is higher in the East. Yeah, and as I showed, there is a certain element of nostalgia to a society of equal payment and a somewhat different distribution between the sexes in working. Yeah, because that is more modern until today in the East than in the West. Yeah, so it's interesting and quite ambivalent and not so easy to explain. Not so easy to explain. Yeah.
First of all, I wanted to thank you for the lesson. It was very interesting. Secondly, I want to say first that I'm not quite an expert regarding German economy or sociological situation. But when you expressed, when you showed us the political propositions made by the single German parties during these elections, I noticed that there was much more pressure put on sociological kind of problems regarding maybe immigration, defense, rather than economical kind of problems. Is this something that derives from the more approachable connection that the people have with sociological problems rather than economical problems, or it is a way to follow the trend of those parties that are rising quickly in Germany from the old comers? Sorry if I misspoke. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you. So for the years of the traffic light coalition, Germany was one of the weakest country in terms of growth. Yeah? And the question is why? Yeah, the question is why. And all parties, including the current government parties, somehow think that too much bureaucracy is a problem. Yeah, there is a tendency in the German system to add on directives from the EU level and to even strengthen things which have been negotiated on the EU stage. And it's a bit strange because the CDU has governed for 16 years before. And now if the CDU plus the SPD plus the FDP plus partly the Greens complain that there is too much bureaucracy, I mean, who's responsible for it? You know, I mean, they have been the governing parties. But this has been an issue, and the CDU has for some reason been most outspoken, with the exception of the FDP maybe, about this. Yeah, so there was this element. Unfortunately, I mean, I can give you my presentation and the link down here. You can find the program, but I think it's in German. The Merz always insisted that the core of the CDU and the CSU program for these elections is economic. Yeah, unfortunately, it was his choice to talk about these issues, but he talked about migration as if there was no other issue at all. And so there is a certain contradiction of saying, well, we have an economic program, but unfortunately we speak about something else. Yeah, so there is this contradiction, and there you can have an effect of the AfD, which brings up the topic, and so the parties have to respond to it.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I just wanted to agree with you
I wanted to agree with you that it is indeed quite remarkable that the CDU, SPD now agreed on a constitutional change, and that they do this also with the votes of the old parliament. So the constitution will be changed by parliamentarians who are no longer elected, because in the new parliament they do not have the majority to do so. That is also remarkable. I think you pointed this out quite nicely, because it contradicts everything that Merz said during the campaign. So you could actually claim that he won the campaign by insisting all the time that the debt brake will not be changed. And in addition, he also used the constitution against the old government, if you remember, because the old government, when they started in 2020, they had a debt and investment-based budget, and Merz at that time called the Constitutional Court, and the Constitutional Court decided against the budget. So that was probably the major damage that was done to the old government, and I'm sure that some of the parliamentarians now in the Bundestag will remember this when they vote now for the constitutional change. But still, I'm a little bit more skeptical that this will really mean that the constitution will not be changed, that there will be a kind of opposition against it. I'm skeptical because of this emergency and security framing. The need for the constitutional change is presented. And so there is this kind of rhetoric that we need to rescue NATO, we need to invest in military, which also seems to be consensus in the European family. There is pressure from abroad also to invest in military. And curiously, it's also exactly what the US wants us to do. So on the one hand, this is now presented as the need to rescue NATO, to save us from Trump and from Putin. But on the other hand, the US exactly wants us to invest in military. They certainly also make a strong pressure on the European partners to invest in military. And my impression is that Germany will obey, and that they will find a majority to do this. But if you are right, and the constitution will not be changed, what does this mean then in this quite dramatic situation for the new government that will be formed in early April? So will it actually survive? Or can it survive without this constitutional change? And if it does not survive, is there a possibility that the constitution will be changed with the votes of the AfD?
Yeah, thank you. I see now it was a mistake not to bring a picture of the current parliament, and with the majorities there. What Hans-Jörg is referring to, that the current government, the current Bundestag plus the CDU would have a majority to change the constitution, whereas in the new parliament, in the new parliament, this is only possible if the leftist party votes with CDU, CSU, and SPD and Greens. Yeah, so this is the difference now. Well, first, maybe I was too strong. I did not really want to say that I don't expect the constitutional change to come. I wanted to express uncertainties regarding this, and they are stronger than I see currently in the German media, for example, because of the sociological constellations both within the CDU and the SPD. Plus, you have a Green Party who has lost an electoral campaign with the promises Merz is doing right now. I mean, if you do a green program, well, there are a few details, but the CDU and the Greens were quite consistent in a lot of areas, but debt brake was the difference. And now Merz is taking it. And so the Greens feel that they have lost a lot of votes on this. So the question is, will they go along with that, with the new coalition, so to say, because now they have this, in addition to the fact that there is a legitimation problem that a new parliament, that an old parliament votes on something which a new parliament should vote on. So I just wanted to introduce votes. I'm not, I'm not taking a bet, but I also don't think it's impossible. Okay, so what if we now take the new parliament? The main, I don't think the AfD is going to be with CDU, CSU, or SPD. I simply don't see where this decision should come from. In addition, that there is this strong, almost pro-Russian position within the AfD. Why would they do it? And also, as I said before to your question, it is the main driver of AfD success to be against to what they call the regime parties. So they would strongly damage themselves, and I don't see why they would do it. But still, I mean, there is a difference, because even the new parliament could change the constitution if Die Linke goes with it. Yeah. So this is what this is showing, and the Linke has for long argued against the debt brake, and with regard to infrastructure, they will go along. With regard to military, they already said they will not go along. So, I mean, the package has been negotiated on 2 levels so far, and I think the idea of Merz to combine the two is to make sure that at least the military element comes through. Yeah, because otherwise there might arise the constellation that the new parliament, gets away with the debt brake, which is clearly anti-CDU, and what Merz would want to gain with it, namely more military spending, does not come along anyway. So I think this is why the 2 issues were linked. And and altogether, I did not show these pictures just like that. This unpredictable, this unpredictable element it's something profound. I mean, it's not like he's talking as politicians do in electoral campaigns, but he has a record of changing positions, strongly changing positions, and therefore there is, it is not really clear. I mean, even if the constitution is changed, I mean, what will happen afterwards? Will he return to his more economic liberal roots within the CDU? Will he become like a hidden SPD politician? It is, in my eyes, it's really hard to predict. This is the element. Did I answer your question? Yeah.
Any other questions?
Maybe
Enrico Borghetta?
Yeah, I have one curiosity. So, can you give us a sense of what happened to the liberals, the FDP, and where did their votes go, and will those votes also come back eventually?
Well, the FDP, the Liberal Party, gained 4.4%. They are under double pressure. Their clearly liberal base was disappointed with the course of the traffic light coalition, so they lost there. Also credibility. And then Lindner himself, on a personal level, was quite unclear. Did he want to leave the traffic coalition, or was it something which was driven by the other partners. And I think this cost him a lot of credibility with people who are not, especially from the liberal camp, but which had a problem with the constellation as a whole. The FDP has always been, you know, I mean, there have been periods before when they were out of parliament for a certain time. I mean, if the CDU is now in the next 4 years really does a lot of spending, a lot of infrastructure spending and a lot of debts and so on, this will be a natural boost for a certain share of voters to come back to the FDP. What is worrying, however, that there are a lot of regions where the party base is really very, very small. Yeah, they are a party which is not so strong in organizational terms, but depends a lot on voters, you know, who are not party members, but voters who come and go. So they're more volatile in a way than some of the other parties. Hard to say. Well, in general, the FDP is also, like all small parties, has a real problem if policy is reflected as being in the EU context. Between 50 and 80% of all legislation in Germany, and in Italy as well, I guess, is predetermined on the EU level. So what can small parties do? They have the possibility to go to symbolic messages, so to say. But whereas one could claim that the Delors Commission and then the Four Freedoms after Maastricht, and then for some time until the financial crisis, you had a kind of liberal, maybe neoliberal general direction on the EU level. Ever since, it's more on, you know, strengthening social policies, strengthening redistribution, you know, with the COVID measures, for example. So the FDP has very limited room in any government to follow its liberal and its liberal policy and its policy to cut back the bureaucracy. So the overall trend is not too positive, but they have returned before, and the falling away of the debt brake is probably going to boost their vote.
From the European University Institute.
Thanks a lot. This was very stimulating, and I agree with everything you said. But as I mentioned before you started talking, I had a hard time sleeping tonight after the message on the debt brake, because that is a sea change potentially if it goes through. And I was also amazed by the fact that Mats, he used the saying whatever it takes, because it's obviously in reference to Mario Draghi's call in 2012. What Mario Draghi meant then was that he single-handedly would have to save the Eurozone by buying debt on the secondary market. What Mats is saying, though, or the implication of it, is a huge comeback for fiscal policy in Germany and potentially in Europe. And I am very, very intrigued by that. I didn't see that coming. And I talked to a German friend yesterday, and he had some idea that maybe Mats had picked up some ideas from his former corporate sort of engagements, that they were telling him, look, businesses in Germany will go broke unless you start spending, because the German model is broke. And so finally, the penny seems to be dropping, that the fiscal policy is the only way to get us out of the hole. But it will also have huge implications, and that's why what would be my question to you, because for a government that refuses to use fiscal policy, things are, you can play a lot of golf. You don't have to worry about things. For a government that decides to add 100 billion a year and 1 trillion in a 10-year period, that's going to be a lot of work. Because you can say you're going to spend, that's one thing, but you need something to spend on. And for that, you need a lot of labor. So that's what I mean. It will have huge European implications. Germany doesn't have labor now. It will have to get it from somewhere. So it means that many European countries that are already short of labor now, such as Italy, they will go to Germany unless something happens. But there are all these real resource constraints that will come to the true fore now in Germany and in the wider Europe. So I'm just asking you to talk to that and maybe speculate what the debate will be like now, because it's clearly that there has to be a lot of social and labor market engineering in the coming years, if this happens.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a very important question, and I can only partly answer. One thing, I think the "whatever it takes" quote, that relied to Ukraine. But I have to say, I've been here also now for 2 days, so I haven't really read the newspaper. But as far as I got it, he used this specific quote not with regard to spending, but with regard to military spending, and we will do whatever it takes to defend Ukraine.
But he also said take bazooka.
As you see with the pictures, you're never really sure, does he use his metaphors very consistently? Of course, the bazooka would be on economic fiscal policy, but I'm not really sure. Bazooka is also something you use on the battlefield. So the whatever it takes is on Ukraine. But no matter if you use that metaphor or not, I mean, what you say is really true. And within the CDU, what I read, the reactions are a bit, what is counted as infrastructure? Yeah, for example, there a lot of, recently there's bridges fell down in Germany unexpectedly. So there is several dozens of billions just to repair bridges. The railroad system is a problem. You have the autobahns, which are a problem in certain areas, not in the east, but in other parts. So this would be infrastructure spending, and okay, there you need the labor force, and I agree. There is, in general, a proper analysis in German politics and among the German elite, including the bureaucracies in the ministries, with regard to the European level. Yeah, and that the German health system, which also faces certain problems, lives on the fact that I think 1/3 of Bulgarian doctors and 50% of Bulgarian nurses left their countries. As you know, it's not an issue. It's not debated in Germany. And this, so you're completely right here. I don't have a real solution, but I have an observation. 15 years ago, I was doing research on the fiscal crisis and the German Bundestag. And I was doing an interview with the parliamentarian then of the SPD who was in the budget committee. And we were talking about, what do you do on EU policy? And he said, yeah, this morning we took a decision on this and that. And I said, it concerns the Portuguese pension system. And he said, yeah, I never thought about that. So I was interested, do they have a European horizon? And he was in that committee directly deciding on the pension level in Portugal, and he didn't even know. So there is this non-knowledge, and it has to do with the fact that parliamentarians in the Bundestag, if they're interested in the EU, go to the EU committee. But they don't go to the budget or other committees. The stronger Germany gets with its half-hegemonic role with regard to the European economy, there should be people who are thinking about consequences abroad. Yeah, and there is certainly a lack of that, and there you are right. True. I mean, if we live in post-functionalist times, are European publics and European elites, is it the only thing they're waiting for that the Germans come back? Particularly now if we talk about military spending. I have tried to add the numbers of EU countries which were occupied by Germany until about 44, 45. I was not so sure where exactly in post-Yugoslavia German troops were or not, but I came to 19. So 19 of the 27 countries EU countries have been invaded by Germany 80 years ago. Okay, 3 generations ago. But Marine Le Pen is already now complaining very much, you know, what are you talking about? European defense with the Germans? No way. Yeah, and I think Poland, you don't have to wait long until the Polish elites will have a similar position. So the stronger this debate gets, the stronger opposition to Germany within the EU polity might get. So, you know, this is something which scholars of European studies would have to think about, and unfortunately, I think it's not much better in many other countries. National parliamentarians are not very aware of the European or the EU implications. And the fact that Ukraine, Turkey, Great Britain are not EU members doesn't make that much easier, because it means in addition you have to combine thinking in terms of the EU polity with European countries which are not part of the EU.
Sorry if I go back to what I said at the beginning. I mean, this is not a normal time. These elections did not occur in a normal time. We may have nationalists or sovereignists like Marine Le Pen scared by the possible spending of Germany on military, but those who are committed to Europe ask for something else. Now the situation is that what we all know. In 2 years, Macron will be out and probably replaced by either Mélenchon or Le Pen herself. Italy is not historically reliable. Britain is out. So who else than Germany may take the leadership? And I'm wondering whether there is an awareness of these in Germany, in the German public, and in Merz, who is going to lead the country for the next years. Thanks.
Merz, when he was out of parliament after 2002, for 15 years, he worked for BlackRock and other companies. So he's from the business sphere, strongly devoted and determined to globalization, but also to the European market. He's Francophone, and he is certainly more committed to the EU than Scholz. Yeah, Scholz, and also Merkel, by the way. I mean, Macron made one suggestion after the other, and leadership could also be in saying, no, we don't want it. This could also be a kind of, you know, at least showing a reaction. But if you, I mean, it was in a way a desperate thing. What are they thinking? You know, what are they thinking? When Macron suggested all kinds of coming together, and his analysis of NATO being brain dead and so on, this was around, no reaction, you know, and therefore I even think that things are going to get better here, because there is this idea of Merz that the European dimension plays a political role and is relevant for people in Germany. Whereas Scholz, you know, you didn't know, does he show interest or doesn't he? And this resulted in a certain type of leadership, which was also driven by single ministers, like Minister of Economics or Minister of the Exterior, who were putting up some positions in Brussels, and you didn't know, does the Chancellor share them or not? Because he simply wouldn't say something with regard to Ukraine, for example. And I think here, like on the personality of Merz, I would expect more. You know, is it leadership or is it cooperation? Is it being aware of a hegemony or not? Hard to say. Hard to say. It will depend a lot on the team. As I said, Klingbeil and him don't have much executive experience. The Merkel years are within the CDU don't have the best reputation, which means a lot of politicians from that area who have executive experience probably will not return. So then the question is, who will return? Maybe people who know the federal system, who have been in governing positions in the Länder, but do they automatically look at Portugal or the Baltic states or so, or Italy? Yeah. So you have this weakness, which is, in my eyes, a general weakness of EU-European political elites, who don't also have a big incentive to be responsive to a European electorate, because the main elections take place on the national level. Yeah, and this is, if you want something like a final remark here, you could see this relevance and importance of national politics even in the EU of 2025 in this German, on this German example, which has, you know, with all its strengths and its weaknesses, because after all, 83.5% of participation in an election is probably more of a good thing than a bad thing.
So I promise is the last question, and then we are going to conclude. So my question is about the situation in Eastern Germany. I'd like to know more. Were there measures addressed to face the problems that are facing in Eastern Europe? I mean, in the programs of the traditional parties, particularly. Did they address the problem that are now high? I can see high rate of unemployment and gender pay gap, but this is also the problem that maybe women are not included in the labor market, because, you know, the higher is the rate, the higher is also the gender pay gap, as we see by the gender inequality index. So I think that they are not included in the labor market. And then infrastructure, the lack of infrastructures. So in Italy, all the parties have, during the electoral period in their programs, some measures addressed to tackle the, Mezzogiorno problems, even if when they are elected they do nothing, but they have. So is there something, an attention, something, or it's just a lost territory, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the map to the left, you'll see that unemployment is not that much higher in the East than in the West. Childcare, better in the East than in the West. So core elements which are relevant in Italy are not relevant with regard to the difference between the East and the West. What is different is a certain emotional experience, especially in the 90s, but also later, having to change their life. And, you know, by and large, not being accepted by West German elites or not integrated. Yeah? So 98.5% of economic leadership positions are taken by West Germans, but the population is 17. So you have a lot of underrepresentation here in elites and in chances, but less in let's say, hard and tough socioeconomic measures. Which leads me to the conclusion that measures would have to be on the symbolic level. You know, have politicians, representatives in the broader sense from East Germany, voicing East German interests. For example, Angela Merkel, there was this famous interview 6 months before she left office, you know, she said, well, always when there were East German, so to say, specificities, I held them back deliberately because I knew that in German-led CDU, I would lose a strong position if I voiced them. So she was trying to be a very good West German, although she came from East Germany. And we had a president from East Germany who was very anti-Russian, very pro-NATO, pro-transatlantic. So he was also, you know, like from their biographies, they were East German, but from the way they expressed their sentiments and so on, they tried everything to be integrated in all German or even West German politics. So this would be one element, you know, allow for representation of those positions which are in the East. Yeah, and then I mean there is. What can you think of? What I try to do is to take the comparative approach. Yeah, what worked? Where? Where would you have, or where do you have typical developments? Yeah, and with comparative developments. And something I like to do is to reflect on the United States. 80 years ago, the United States was more or less a coherent country, and over the years, you know, with globalization or with economic mobility, mobility and so on, ever faster growing, you now have liberal parts and conservative parts in the U.S. Yeah. And there is a similarity to East Germany. A lot of mobile persons have gone to Stuttgart or have gone to Frankfurt am Main or gone to Hamburg. And conservative-minded people have stayed. They're not so mobile. That doesn't mean that 100% of East Germans are, you know, conservative. But the structural differences are there and probably cannot be healed. I mean, what kind of economic positions could you create in Erfurt or Frankfurt an der Oder which would bring back somebody from Stuttgart or from Hamburg? It is about developing own areas of emotional well-being, that people like where they are, that they don't seem overwhelmed, that they think that they can develop political programs maybe on the local level, on the regional level for themselves, that they don't constantly get rules from Brussels or from Berlin which interfere in their way of thinking. So these are the elements which are in the German debate, and a lot is rooted in this experience of the 90s. You could include the 80s and the 90s. In East Germany, you had this opposition, and the democratic movement overthrew the East European, the SED regime. Yeah, so protest has a positive connotation of, you know, of bringing down conditions which are bad. And so you have, until today, you have in the BSW, in the AfD, also in the left, you have this idea protesting against conditions you can change is a good thing. You have to do it. Otherwise, you know, otherwise you're this is not democracy. Where is democracy if you cannot protest against things which are bad? But then in the overall German political culture, this kind of protest is not always seen as a good thing. So there is this idea, and there you have a cultural East and a cultural West, if you want. And look at other countries like the US, where you have cultural differences between Texas and California, or look at the difference between the south of Italy and the Milano region, or look at Paris and the rest of France. So you have these long-term tendencies of centers which are liberal and peripheries which are not liberal. And Germans are learning at the moment what this means in political terms.
Thank you. Thank you for your really interesting lecture, and